The history of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is one of the most cherished documents in American history. Drafted in 1776, it marked the birth of the United States as a sovereign nation, independent from British rule. More than just a declaration of war or separation, it was a profound expression of Enlightenment ideals, liberty, equality, and the right to self-determination. The journey to this declaration was long and complex, shaped by political conflict, philosophical ideas, and the courage of individuals who dared to challenge the greatest empire of their time. Colonial America. The foundation, British colonization and governance. In the early 1600s, British settlers established the first permanent colonies in North America, beginning with Jamestown in 1607. Over the next century and a half, 13 colonies emerged along the Atlantic coast. These included Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Though each colony had its own government, laws, and local identity, all were under British rule. They operated with a degree of autonomy, but the ultimate authority rested with the British Crown and Parliament. As the colonies grew in population and economic power, tensions over governance began to rise, mercantilism and economic strain. Britain's economic policy was rooted in mercantilism, the belief that colonies existed to enrich the mother country. The Navigation Acts of the 17th century restricted colonial trade, forcing Americans to export certain goods only to Britain and import British goods at high prices. While many colonists circumvented these laws through smuggling, the policies sowed resentment. Over time, as Britain sought to tighten control and extract more revenue, especially after expensive European wars, the friction escalated. The culmination of these policies would eventually bring the colonies to a breaking point. Seeds of revolution, the French and Indian War, 1754-1763. The 7 Years' War, known in America as the French and Indian War, was fought between Britain and France for control of North American territory. Britain emerged victorious but deeply in debt. To recover financially, Parliament looked to the colonies to help pay for the war's expenses and the continued presence of British troops in North America. Taxation without representation. The first major flashpoint came with the Stamp Act of 1765, which imposed a direct tax on printed materials. Colonists responded with outrage, asserting that they could not be taxed by a parliament in which they had no elected representatives. The rallying cry, "No taxation without representation," became a unifying principle. Subsequent taxes, such as the Townshend Acts, 1767, and the Tea Act, 1773, only intensified anger. These laws were seen as abuses of British power, designed to exploit the colonies without their consent. Resistance took many forms, including protests, boycotts, and the creation of organizations like the Sons of Liberty. Toward independence, the Boston Massacre and Tea Party. On March 5, 1770, a confrontation between British soldiers and Boston civilians resulted in the Boston Massacre, in which 5 colonists were killed. Though a small incident, it galvanized anti-British sentiment. 3 years later, the Boston Tea Party, a protest against the Tea Act in which colonists dumped British tea into Boston Harbor, led to harsh reprisals from the British government. The Intolerable Acts and First Continental Congress. In response to the Tea Party, Britain passed the Coercive Acts, known as the Intolerable Acts in America, which closed Boston Harbor and restricted Massachusetts' self-governance. This pushed many previously moderate colonists toward rebellion. In 1774, representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies convened the First Continental Congress to organize resistance. They agreed to boycott British goods and petitioned the king for redress of grievances. Their pleas were ignored. The outbreak of war, Lexington and Concord tensions finally erupted into violence on April 19, 1775, with the battles of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. British troops attempted to seize colonial weapons, but were met with armed resistance. These were the first shots of the American Revolutionary War. Lexington and Concord, the Second Continental Congress. In May 1775, the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia to manage the colonial war effort. They established the Continental Army, with George Washington as its commander. Despite the war's beginning, many still hoped for reconciliation with Britain. The Congress even sent the Olive Branch Petition to King George III, affirming loyalty and seeking peace. The king rejected it and declared the colonies in rebellion. The idea of independence shifting public opinion. Throughout 1775 and into early 1776, public opinion began to shift from reconciliation to full independence. Influential pamphlets, especially Thomas Paine's Common Sense, January 1776, argued that monarchy was unjust and that America had a moral obligation to sever ties with Britain. Paine's writing reached ordinary people, expressing complex political ideas in plain language. His powerful arguments influenced thousands, turning the tide toward independence. Drafting the Declaration, a call for action. By mid-1776, calls for independence grew louder. On June 7th, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia introduced a resolution in the Continental Congress stating that the colonies ought to be free and independent states. Debate followed, but the Congress appointed a committee of 5 to draft a formal declaration. The Committee of 5. The committee included Thomas Jefferson, Virginia; primary author John Adams, Massachusetts; Benjamin Franklin, Pennsylvania; Roger Sherman, Connecticut; Robert R. Livingston, New York. Thomas Jefferson, chosen for his eloquence and writing ability, began drafting the document in mid-June 1776. He wrote it in a rented room in Philadelphia, drawing from Enlightenment philosophers, colonial grievances, and prior documents like Virginia's Declaration of Rights. Structure and content. The Declaration has 4 main parts. Preamble explains the purpose of the document and the colonists' right to declare independence. Declaration of Natural Rights asserts universal human rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. List of grievances details complaints against King George III, portraying him as a tyrant. Resolution of Independence declares the colonies free and independent states. Adoption and impact. July 4, 1776. On July 2, 1776, Congress voted in favor of independence. 2 days later, on July 4th, they officially adopted the Declaration of Independence. John Hancock, President of the Congress, famously signed it with a bold signature. The document was sent to be printed by John Dunlap, and copies, known as Dunlap broadsides, were distributed across the colonies and read aloud in town squares. These readings sparked celebrations and ignited patriotic fervor. Signatures and final copy. Although July 4th is celebrated as Independence Day, most delegates signed the document on August 2, 1776, on a parchment copy prepared by Timothy Matlack. In total, 56 delegates signed it. Their commitment was extraordinary. They risked their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. Philosophical foundations, Enlightenment influence. The Declaration reflects Enlightenment ideals, particularly those of John Locke, who argued that government derives its power from the consent of the governed and must protect natural rights. If it fails, people have a right to revolt. Jefferson adopted these ideas and framed the American cause not just as a political separation, but as a universal moral imperative. Radical yet conservative. While revolutionary in breaking from monarchy, the Declaration was conservative in protecting property and existing hierarchies. It did not challenge slavery or gender inequality. However, its assertion of equality would inspire future reform movements, including abolition and civil rights. Global impact, international reactions. The Declaration sent shockwaves around the world. France and Spain, rivals of Britain, were intrigued and eventually allied with the American cause. The French, especially, were moved by its ideals, which later influenced the French Revolution. Legacy of freedom over time. The Declaration inspired movements in Latin America, Europe, and Africa. Its language became a universal symbol of human freedom and self-determination. The Declaration and the United States, a symbol of nationhood. After the Revolutionary War ended in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris, the Declaration remained a touchstone of American identity. It laid the moral and philosophical foundation for the U.S. Constitution, 1787, and the Bill of Rights, 1791. Abraham Lincoln and civil rights. In 1858 and again during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln invoked the Declaration to argue against slavery. In his famous Gettysburg Address, 1863, he called the nation one conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. The civil rights movement of the 20th century also drew from the Declaration. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. cited its promises as a moral compass for justice and equality. Preservation and memory. Where it is today, the original signed declaration is preserved in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. It is displayed in the Rotunda for the Charters of Freedom alongside the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. July 4th. Celebrations. Independence Day, celebrated each July 4th, honors the adoption of the Declaration. It has become a day of fireworks, parades, speeches, and remembrance. It reminds Americans of their shared values and founding principles. Conclusion. The Declaration of Independence is more than a historical document. It is the moral backbone of the United States. Crafted in a time of war and uncertainty, it boldly proclaimed the right of a people to govern themselves and established a vision of human rights that transcended time and borders. From its philosophical roots to its enduring legacy, the Declaration remains a symbol of hope, courage, and the pursuit of liberty. Its words continue to inspire those who believe in democracy, equality, and the unalienable rights of all people.
Please like, share, and subscribe for more videos.